guys, just a follow-up video on the one we did prior to this. It's about the field of textual criticism, and it sort of discussed how textual critics have, how they use their methodology to try to reconstruct an original, or what they believe to be the original, or as Eldon J as he quotes in the book here, page 247, that they've sort of given up on trusting that they can find any original text. And so the term original text has different meanings, but they believe that they can at least try to arrive at the earliest forms of various texts, to various textual traditions, and that they believe that's the extent of what they can do. So as the scholars have sort of abandoned that idea that they can reconstruct the original text, what they're trying to do is establish various eclectic texts. For example, Emmanuel Tav, he's a professor at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, when discussing the Masoretic text, which has traditionally been used, and he mentions it's the preferred Hebrew text among Christians and Judaism, and it's considered by scholars. It's referenced in most of their commentaries and whatnot, but they want to supplant the Masoretic text and build an eclectic text in its place based on their scholarship. So he says in page 242, he says, while Judaism and Christianity largely adhere to the Masoretic text with regard to the shape of the Hebrew Bible, Christianity developed a more liberal approach toward the New Testament. Traditionally, Christianity turns to the eclectic New Testament text of Erasmus, and part of the eclecticism is related to variants that are synonymous. So it says, by the same token, Christianity allows room for changing modern translations of the Old and New Testament based on an ever-changing textual basis. It even allows room for changing attitudes concerning the inspiration of the ancient versions. Christianity thus has accepted the search for an original text of the New Testament, and to a lesser extent the Old Testament, both of which change all the time with our improved understanding of textual sources. When you go to try to reestablish the original or a original text among all the variants and questions, it's going to be an ever-changing process, and so he goes on to describe it further in the same chapter, page 246, under the discussion of eclectic editions. An eclectic edition does not focus on a single source, such as the Masoretic text or the Septuagint, but creates its own original text of the Hebrew Bible by selecting readings from all available sources. In practice, when creating an eclectic edition, editors take the Masoretic text as their point of departure and replace details of it with other readings. So they are basically constructing their original based on their textual analysis. Needless to say, the reconstruction of the text, which is just German for original text, requires subjective decisions, and if textual scholars indulge their textual acumen, each scholar would create a different text or original. And he said, if I were to follow this procedure myself, the text I would create this year would differ from the one 5 years hence. If we follow this approach, many different eclectic editions are bound to inundate us. Upon whose edition or whose Bible will the scholars then focus their exegetical activity? If committees prepare such editions, the situation would not improve, because the judgment of a committee is not necessarily better than that of an experienced individual. And so ultimately you end up with many competing originals because they're trying to reconstruct it. And when you think about what their whole enterprise here, as they mentioned in this book and other places, that the scholars agree that the vast majority of the manuscripts that have existed are lost. So they're trying to make conclusions based on what has happened to survive through the accident of history. The discussion gets into the various families of manuscripts. They reference Eldon as well, referencing that discovery of the papyri in Egypt, that it's not likely that in Alexandria the manuscripts that they find that happen to survive due to the climate conditions, that could be an example of Christianity or the textual tradition globally. So again, it's a lot of assumption built into it. And so the question is, if scholars can't reconstruct the text, then what's to be done? What's final authority? And as we've mentioned, presuppositionally, you can establish that God has in fact preserved His Word, and an alternative to scholars trying to use textual methods to reconstruct the text is the idea that the church can collectively, over a period of time, by reason of use, through tradition, establish the text. That's an alternative position, and if you take that route, I would argue you end up with roughly the Masoretic text and Textus Receptus. And that might not be a scholarly approach, as some would hope, but it's kind of like Christ. When He appeared, the Bible says that the common people heard Him gladly, but when it came to the scholars, the scribes and the Pharisees, they said, never man spake like this man. And the Pharisees said, are ye also deceived? Have any of the rulers or the Pharisees believed on Him? But this people who knoweth not the law are cursed. And so this attitude is that we can't trust the common people to confirm that He's the Christ. We scholars have to establish that. So, that might be a mirror of what we see happening here. But let me know what you think in the comments below.